He looked just like any other kid, skinny, quiet, invisible, until the day Sylvester Stallone walked into his life and everything changed. At first, no one saw him, not the teachers, not the bullies, not even his own reflection. He wasn't fast, wasn't strong, and definitely wasn't him, much less survive middle school. But one sketch, one unexpected visit, one quiet rooftop conversation would ignite something inside him that even punches couldn't silence. What happened next not only stunned his entire school, it showed the world what true strength really looks like. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories that leave a mark, hit that subscribe button. Because tomorrow at 6 p.m., we have another powerful journey waiting for you. He didn't look like a fighter. He didn't speak like one either. But something about the way he stood in that hallway, shoulders slumped and eyes heavy with quiet fire, told you he was battling something much bigger than fists. Jake Dawson was 13 and already tired of pretending the world didn't hurt. It was late September in Philadelphia, and the cold had started slipping into the cracks of the sidewalks and people's routines. Jake always walked with his hands buried deep in his hoodie, sketchbook clutched tightly against his side, like a shield. Inside were characters he created, heroes with broken arms, blind warriors who could still sense truth, quiet knights who wore invisibility like armor. But no one ever saw those, not even his mother. At Jefferson Middle School, invisibility wasn't protection. It was an invitation. "Yo, Bambi legs!" Troy's voice rang out behind him. Jake kept walking. "Hey, I said..." The push wasn't strong, just enough to slam his sketchbook to the floor, pages scattering like feathers into the slush. Kids watched. No one helped. Jake didn't cry, not anymore, not since last year. But he did stoop down, shaking hands, gathering his drawings like secrets. Therefore, Troy stomped on one with a grin, his favorite one. The page with a hooded boxer standing in the rain, head bowed beneath the lights of a silent ring. Jake had shaded it for hours. The eyes were his. The boot twisted once and lifted. "You gonna cry about it?" Troy sneered. "No," Jake said softly, brushing off the ruined page. "Just drawing your obituary." The cafeteria exploded with gasps, laughter. But Troy didn't laugh, not this time, and Jake knew it. He'd crossed a line. That night, he didn't talk to his mom. She worked late anyway, double shift at the hospital. Jake microwaved a burrito, fed the cat, then climbed onto the roof like he always did when things got too loud inside. From up there, the city looked like a broken circuit board, flickering with stories no one had time to hear. Jake pulled out his sketchbook again, still damp at the edges, and began to draw. He didn't know that across the street, someone had been watching. 2 days later, he found a letter in his locker. No name. Just a sentence scribbled in thick black marker. "Real strength isn't something you show, it's something you survive." Jake froze, looked around. Nobody seemed to care, but the handwriting was familiar, powerful, almost cinematic. He slipped the note into his pocket. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Sylvester Stallone was walking into Lincoln Rec Center. He wore a plain black cap pulled low, hoodie zipped halfway, and his usual quiet smile that only showed when no one was watching. The guy at the desk looked up. "Can I help you?" Stallone nodded. "Yeah, I heard there's a kid here who can draw." 3 days earlier, someone had posted a photo online. It was a sketch, rough charcoal lines but unmistakable. It was him, Rocky. Standing in the rain, fists lowered, face unseen, just posture, weight, regret, power, no signature, just initials. J.D. Stallone stared at it longer than he expected. Back at school, things escalated. Jake was cornered outside gym class, shoved into a locker, his sketchbook stolen and passed around like a joke. Someone posted a video online titled "Art Girl Cries" with 3 laughing emojis. Jake didn't cry. He went silent. And silence for Jake was always the last warning before something broke. That evening, Stallone walked into the school unannounced. He was supposed to be visiting the rec center only, but something about that drawing had pulled him in deeper. He didn't call press, didn't alert staff, asked around. Kid named Jake Dawson, quiet, carries a sketchbook. The janitor nodded. Roof. Jake heard footsteps climbing the fire escape. He turned, startled, but didn't run. The man standing before him wasn't wearing a cape, wasn't glowing, wasn't what he expected. But Jake knew him instantly. Oh, you're... Yeah, Stallone said. And you're the kid who drew this. He pulled out a folded, slightly crumpled page. Jake's drawing. How did you... Stallone sat beside him, grunting quietly as he lowered himself. You got something to say? World just hasn't learned to listen yet. Jake didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, he looked away, out over the city. The two of them sat in silence for a while, until Stallone broke it. You know, people think strength is loud, muscles, noise, but most of the strongest people I've met, they're just trying to stay upright. Jake blinked. You've been knocked down. Jake nodded. Stallone nodded back. Good, he said. Now let's figure out how you're going to stand up. But Jake wasn't ready to believe him. Therefore, when he returned to school the next day and found his locker graffitied with punching bag in red marker, he didn't go to class. He walked past the office, past the rec center, straight to the alley behind Roosevelt Boxing Gym. A place he'd seen 1,000 times on his walk home, but never dared enter, until now. Inside, the air smelled of sweat and determination. Ropes creaked, gloves thudded. No one noticed him, until a man in a gray hoodie approached. You lost, kid? Jacob. No, I'm here to learn how to get hit without falling apart. The man raised an eyebrow. You sure? Before Jake could answer, another voice cut through. Yeah, he's sure. Stallone stood at the door, arms crossed. Let's get to work. Jake's first punch was clumsy, weak, embarrassing. They laughed. He flushed. Stallone stepped forward, placed a hand on his shoulder, and whispered something that Jake would never forget. You don't train to hit harder, kid. You train so the world's punches don't hit you the same way anymore. Jake looked up, and for the first time in his life, he believed him. The first week was agony. Jake's arms felt like rubber. His ribs ached. His knuckles were raw. And every time he threw a punch, Stallone would just shake his head. Again. Again. It wasn't about the punch. Jake was starting to realize that. It was about what happened before the punch. What was happening inside him. At school, nothing had changed. Troy still called him names. The others still laughed behind his back. And Jake still walked the halls like a ghost. But something had started shifting. Therefore, he no longer flinched when someone shouted his name. He no longer ducked his head when Troy walked by. He just looked at him. Really looked. And something in Troy flinched instead. Jake's mom noticed the bruises. At first, she thought it was more bullying. Then one night, she followed him after dinner. She found him in the ring, barely holding his stance, breathing heavy, gloves drooping, tears of frustration in his eyes. She stormed in. What the hell is this? She snapped. Stallone looked up, calm. Boxing, ma'am. Old school. You're training my son like a fighter? No, I'm training him like someone who's finally ready to stop running. Jake lowered his gloves, shame on his face. But his mom saw something else in his eyes, something she hadn't seen in a long time. Fire. She didn't smile, didn't approve. But she stayed and watched, all the way to the final round. Later that night, Jake sat on the roof again, knuckles iced in a towel. Stallone climbed up next to him. You mad at me? Jake asked. Nah, Stallone replied. She's scared. That's what moms do. Jake looked down at his hands. I'm not strong. Nope, Stallone said. Not yet. That's why you're here. Why me? Stallone took a long breath. Because I saw something in that drawing. The way you shaded the rain, the weight in his back. You didn't just draw Rocky, you understood him? That's rare." Jake didn't speak. "Most people draw muscles, you drew pain." The next week, things shifted again. Jake didn't react when Troy mocked him. Didn't fight back when his sketchbook was snatched. He just stood there, still, present. And it unnerved people more than anger ever had. In the gym, Stallone made him practice falling, again and again. "What's the point of this?" Jake groaned, sprawled on the mat. "So you stop fearing it." Fearing what?" "Losing." Jake looked at him. Stallone tapped his chest. "You only stand up when you stop fearing the floor." Then came the reviravolta minor. One afternoon, Jake stayed late in the art room. Ms. Weaver, the teacher, was grading papers. Jake was finishing a charcoal sketch of a boy with cracked armor. Suddenly, Troy walked in, alone. Jake tensed, but Troy didn't speak, just stood there. "Why are you here?" Jake asked, not looking up. Troy hesitated. You drew my dad." Jake blinked. "What?" Troy stepped closer. "That sketch of the guy in the ring. My dad used to be a fighter, lost everything, drinks now. That drawing looked just like him." Jake didn't answer. Troy looked away, his voice cracked. "He used to train me, until I stopped being worth it." Then he turned and walked out, leaving Jake speechless. That night, Jake didn't go to the gym. He didn't climb the roof. He just sat in his room, sketchbook open, staring at the blank page. The world wasn't what he thought, and neither was Troy. The next day, Jake brought a new drawing to school. A boy in armor, but this time, the armor was cracked open to reveal light inside. He pinned it to the hallway bulletin board, unsigned. Troy saw it and didn't say a word. Training intensified. Stallone pushed harder. You think strength is silence? It's not. Strength is knowing when to speak, when to roar. Jake exhaled. "I don't want to be like him." "Who?" "Troy." Stallone nodded. "Then don't hit like him." Final scene of this block. At school, the bullying has nearly stopped, but he walks into the bathroom and finds Troy punching the hand dryer, furious, alone. Jake pauses, then sets his sketchbook down on the sink. "Take it," he says. "Maybe draw something next time." Troy stares at him, no words, just breath, and Jake leaves. That night, Jake receives a DM, unknown account. No message, just a photo. A crude pencil sketch of a boxing glove cracked open, with a small light inside. Jake stares at it for a long time and smiles. Jake was changing. Everyone could see it, especially Troy. And that was a problem. Because when someone grows, it doesn't just transform them. It disturbs everyone still stuck in the place they used to be. Stallone noticed first. Jake was faster, sharper, but his punches had changed. They were controlled, measured. "Why are you holding back?" Stallone asked after a round. Jake shrugged, panting. "I'm not." Stallone narrowed his eyes. "Kid, your body might be in the fight, but your heart's in a conversation." That week, a new flyer went up in the school hallway. Annual Winter Showcase, Talent and Courage Night. Ms. Weaver nudged Jake. "You should enter. That new sketch you've been working on? The one with the cracked crown?" Jake shook his head. "Not a chance." "But it's not for everyone." That night, Stallone waited for him outside the gym. "You afraid of something?" he asked, casually lighting a cigar. Jake frowned. "What?" "The stage, the eyes, the idea of being seen." Jake stayed quiet. Stallone tapped his chest with the cigar end. "Let me tell you something about fear. It doesn't shrink when you hide from it. It grows, in the dark, in silence." Jake kicked a pebble. "What if they laugh?" Stallone looked at him with a smirk. "Then you let them, but you still finish your round." One afternoon, Jake saw something strange. Troy, sitting alone, crying. Not full sobs, just a single tear, quickly wiped away, as he stared at a crumpled paper in his lap. Jake didn't interrupt, but that image stayed in his mind all night. At the gym, Stallone gave him a challenge. "You ever shadowboxed in public?" Jake blinked. Outside?" Stallone nodded. Jake hesitated. "No. Let's fix that." They went to the top of the rocky steps at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Tourists watched. Kids pointed. Jake felt his throat tighten. "I can't." Stallone looked at him. "You already did." What?" "You came up the steps." Jake turned slowly, breath visible in the winter air, and then he started to move, one jab, one step, then another. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. People clapped, not loud, but enough. Reviravolta principle. That weekend, Jake got home to find his mom at the kitchen table. She held a letter from the school. His entry to the winter showcase had been accepted. He frowned. "I didn't sign up." She handed him a folded slip. In familiar handwriting, "The world needs to see how you see it. T. Troy." Jake felt his stomach twist. The night of the event, Jake stood backstage with his sketch pinned to a board. It was different from anything he'd done before. A boy, hollowed out, crawling through a dark tunnel. But the walls were etched with scenes from his own journey, moments of pain, moments of standing back up. And just ahead, a light, not a spotlight, a window, the title, "Things That Didn't Kill Me." As Jake walked on stage, the room blurred. Too many eyes, too much noise. But then from the back row, he saw it. A black cap, a still silhouette. Stallone. Jake cleared his throat. "They said I was weak. They were right. But they forgot to mention something." He turned the board around, revealing the sketch. "Strength isn't how loud you are. It's how many times you come back when no one thinks you should." Silence. Then, applause. Troy approached him after. Didn't speak, just nodded, and handed Jake a small sketch on notebook paper. It was crude, but it was honest. A boy and a mirror. The reflection smiled. That night, Jake and Stallone sat on the roof again. Jake held the school trophy in his hand. "I don't care about this," he said. Stallone smiled. "I know." Jake looked at him. "So, what now?" Stallone leaned back, eyes on the stars. "Now you teach someone else." But before Jake could answer, a siren wailed in the distance, then another, then 3 texts buzzed on Jake's phone. He read them, paused, looked at Stallone. "It's Troy." Troy had been taken to the hospital. Overdose. The sketch Jake had given him was still folded in his jacket. Blood on the edge. The hospital smelled like lemon bleach and fear. Jake sat in the waiting room, his hoodie pulled over his head, hands clenched tight in his lap. Troy's name wasn't on the whiteboard. No one would tell him anything. He felt helpless. Powerless again. The worst part? He recognized the feeling. Stallone arrived 20 minutes later. Didn't say a word, just sat beside Jake, quiet. Finally, Jake spoke. "Why'd he do it?" Stallone sighed. "You don't always get to know the answer to that." Jake shook his head. "But he was trying. He was getting better." "Sometimes people fall," Stallone gently, "even when they're climbing." An hour passed. Then a nurse called Jake's name. He stood up fast. "I'm not family." "She asked for you." Troy looked small in the bed, paler, but alive. He turned his head slowly, eyes puffy but focused. "They said you were here." Jake nodded, stepping closer. Troy tried to laugh. "Guess I'm not invincible after all." Jake swallowed hard. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Troy blinked. "Didn't want to be that guy. The sad one. The broken one." Jake looked down. "You already were. We both were." Troy laughed again, dry, painful. Then he reached over to the nightstand, held up the sketch Jake had once given him. "It was the only thing I didn't burn." Jake sat beside him, and for the first time, they didn't need to say much. 2 weeks passed. Winter settled in. The snow came down in flurries, softening the city's edges. Jake kept training, but it was different now. Less about fists, more about balance. One day, Stallone pulled him aside mid-session. "You ever think about coaching?" Jake blinked. "I'm still learning." "You always will be," Stallone said. "That's what makes a good coach." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You saying I'm ready?" "I'm saying you've already started." Later that week, Jake went back to his old roof. He brought 2 sketchbooks, one filled with his journey and one blank. He left the blank one at the edge of the stairwell with a note inside. "For the next kid who thinks being quiet means being weak. Tell your story or draw it, just don't keep it inside." J.D. Spring came early. At school, kids walked differently around him now, not with fear, with curiosity, respect. He didn't become popular, didn't want to, but he became visible. And that was enough. In the art room, a new exhibit appeared. Not signed. Just titled, "Punching Back Without Fists." It showed a boy kneeling, not in defeat but in prayer, with shadows behind him and light at his back. The plaque beneath it read, "We all fall, but not everyone stands with purpose." Jake received a letter, handwritten. "You're invited to speak at the city's Youth Empowerment Gala. Theme, Finding Strength in Silence." He looked up from the paper, then to the mirror. He still didn't look like a fighter, still didn't speak like one either. But now, therefore, he knew that was his strength. That night on the roof, Stallone returned one last time. "You ready to tell them?" he asked. Jake smiled. "Not yet." Stallone raised an eyebrow. "I'm going to show them first." The next morning, Jake stood in front of a packed auditorium. No notes, no stage lights, just a sketch pinned behind. He took a breath and said the same words that started everything. He didn't look like a fighter. He didn't speak like one either. But something about the way he stood in that hallway told you he was battling something much bigger than fists. The crowd went still, then rose, applause, tears, silence between each clap, like space carved out for memory. Stallone, watching from the wings, gave a small nod, whispered to himself, "Now you're in the ring for real." He didn't look like a fighter, but maybe that's exactly what real fighters look like. If you made it this far, I just want to say, thank you, really. Life hits hard sometimes, and stories like this, about getting back up, about finding your strength when nobody believes in you, those matter. So if you saw yourself in this kid, or maybe in the fight, just remember, it ain't about how hard you hit, it's about how hard you can get hit, and keep moving forward. I appreciate you watching. Stay strong out there, and never stop swinging.